how much Bitcoin you actually need to retire. I've given a lot of thought, and right now in the fiat world, it's getting exponentially more expensive to be able to retire in fiat world. Okay, all of a sudden being a millionaire doesn't mean anything. Like if you've got $1 million in Australia, you can't even buy the average size home. Like in Sydney, it costs $1.5 million to buy a home in Sydney. So a lot of people are naturally thinking, how can I get ahead? How can I get out of this 9-to-5 rat race? And this kind of sent me down a rabbit hole looking at, okay, again, in a hypothetical world, again, let's assume Bitcoin takes over. How much Bitcoin do you actually need to get rich? And how achievable is it? Because everybody can feel it. Like everybody who's in the lower class or the middle class or even the upper class, they're really struggling to be able to retire. Okay, we are, suffering from that 10% loss of purchasing power of our money every single year. And it feels like that magic number that we need to retire in fiat land continues to run away from us. It was $500,000 a decade ago. Now it's $1 million. And in a decade's time, you might need $2 million to retire. Whereas I think if you look at the Bitcoin land, things are a little bit different. And that's because there's only 21 million Bitcoin available, and nobody will ever be able to increase that number of Bitcoin. So what I wanted to look at was I wanted to assume, okay, what if we see a Pareto's principle distribution happen onto a Bitcoin standard? And all of Pareto's principles distribution is it's the classic 80-20. So you hear people say, typically the 20% of the richest people in society control 80% of the resources. And this is a distribution that you can see in lots of different disciplines, not just wealth. We might talk about those later if it's of interest. But I said, okay, let's assume we see this Pareto's principle distribution. How much Bitcoin do you need to become, a new part of this millionaire class? So we know today there's somewhere around 50 to 60 million millionaires. So I looked at this Pareto's principles distribution on a Bitcoin standard, and I was pleasantly surprised at how little Bitcoin you actually need to become a part of the the new 1% or the new millionaire class or the new billionaire class. Okay, so when you run the numbers and you say, okay, hang on a minute, there is only 16 million Bitcoin actually available for sale. Okay, we do know that 4 to 5 million Bitcoin are lost. You can get to some pretty wonky numbers. Like, for example, I actually found that you only really need like 0.1 Bitcoin to become a part of this new millionaire class on a Bitcoin standard if we do assume that we have this Pareto's principle distribution. But things get even more bullish and things get even more wonky when you actually consider or you entertain an even more bullish hypothetical thought experiment. And that is, hang on a minute, out of those 16 million Bitcoin that, actually do circulate, how many of those will be available for sale in the future when the other 99% of the world wants to buy some Bitcoin? Because we do know today only around 1% of the world actually holds Bitcoin on chain in their own self-custody. So again, this is another question, how much Bitcoin is going to be available in the future? Well, again, I ran a second assumption. More bullish, I understand that. So again, run your own numbers. If you don't believe my numbers, go run your own. But I said, all right, let's assume only 4 million Bitcoin are actually available for sale. Sounds crazy, but I mean, right now there's only 2 million Bitcoin sitting on exchanges. There's only 3 million Bitcoin that circulate regularly and go onto and off to the exchanges on a relatively regular fashion. Let's assume there's 4 million Bitcoin available for sale. And when you run that calculation, assuming a Pareto's principle distribution on a Bitcoin standard, you find out you only need 0.015 Bitcoin to become a part of the new millionaire class. So there's only going to be 80 million people in the world who will be able to get their hands on 0.015 Bitcoin. And that is absolutely nuts because that is not a lot of money. That's about $700 today. Okay. So again, 0.1 Bitcoin today, that's about $7,000. And 0.01 Bitcoin, 1% of a Bitcoin, that could get you into the new millionaire class. It's only about $700 today, which is just crazy when you really think about it. So that's kind of how I think about, this whole topic of retiring on Bitcoin. I think if you can become a part of a very select and rare individuals, like only 80 million people on the planet Earth could accumulate that 0.01 Bitcoin, I'm assuming that's going to be enough Bitcoin to retire on in the future.
What do you use, like the actual tools that you're using to model some of these? Or do you have some of your own things that you've been using or you kind of created?
I look at them all. I love the Nakamoto portfolio from Swan. That's really cool. I have played around with Saylor's most recent calculator as well, Bitcoin 2024, I think he calls it, or something weird like that. I'm actually going to do a video on that. I actually most like When Moon. It is a plugin that you can use. I believe an Australian created it. I'll get the link for it and put it down below in the show notes for you guys. But it's a little bit of a calculator where you can plug in how much Bitcoin you own, how much Bitcoin you want to spend each year to reach your retirement. Again, I love these assumptions because, again, retirement means different things for different people. And then this calculator also says, okay, how much do you think Bitcoin's going to appreciate by in the future? You can plug in your own CAGR, whether you want to be conservative and say 20%, or you want to be more bullish like me and say 50 or 100%. And you can also plug in an assumption for the debasement of fiat currency. So I love this website because you can literally run your own maths. I believe it's called When Moon. And I play around with this calculator a lot, and you get some pretty similar numbers. Like you can retire on 0.1 Bitcoin a lot quicker than most people think, okay? And that is simply because, Bitcoin is so rare, it's so scarce, and we do know that fiat currency is going to continue to be debased into the future. So again, I did a video on that recently, and even with like 0.1 Bitcoin, I believe you can retire pretty comfortably by something like 2028 from memory. I did that video a couple of months ago now, but I think it's like that's pretty soon. Retiring on 0.1 Bitcoin, it's only a $7,000 investment. But again, people don't think, what's Bitcoin going to do in the next 4 to 5 years between now and 2028? That's 2 cycles time. We just had a halving in 2025. We're in the early stages of what I think is a bull run. Then we have another halving in 2028. We should get another couple of positive years then. And people just aren't thinking in that exponential fashion because they're thinking in these linear fashions. They're thinking, Bitcoin sees diminishing returns every cycle. Bitcoin's becoming less volatile and the returns we're getting are less and less and less. And I just don't think that's going to hold true for very long. Okay, again, people are, they're writing essays on the fact that we have 4 data points. And they believe that the 4 data points we've seen previously will actually hold true into the future. They're saying, let's extrapolate the first 15 years of Bitcoin data into the next 15 years. And they're just missing the fundamental problem with doing that. Okay, in the first 15 years, less than 1% of the world bought Bitcoin. And in the first 15 years, you saw a rising amount of supply available for sale. Bitcoins were being mined, they were being dumped onto the market. 19.5 million coins are being mined. And the big money wasn't interested in Bitcoin for the first 11 or 12 years of Bitcoin's life. I believe they have been since 2021. But again, I think in the next 15 years, we have a fundamentally different macroeconomic environment for Bitcoin. We're going to have decreasing supply. There's going to be less than 1 million coins mined over the next 15 years. And we're going to see serious demand from more than 1% of the world, okay? We have the big money, nation states, pension funds, corporations. We have billionaires, millionaires. They're all FOMOing into Bitcoin today, okay? And we didn't have that before 2021. So I think the whole idea of diminishing returns is going to be a fun one to watch break. I think that's how I'm thinking about it over the next few years.
I think Bitcoin Magazine put it out or whatever it was, but just showing the average house going down. Like, do you think people are really going to have to switch their mindset again of seeing the cost of things come down, that you might be earning less technically in Bitcoin, but everything in your life is getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper? Instead of 600 Bitcoin for that awesome house you wanted, now it's 6 Bitcoin. What do you think when you go into terms of like housing and things like that? How do you look at that?
If you want the answer to that question right there and you like that spicy clip, check it out here. Come on, we'll see you in there. But if you want the full interview in its entirety, all the spicy clips put together, and you're not going to want to miss it, believe me, then check that out here. Come on, we'll see you in there. Do it.